What is that? Said Lopez. An authentic story is about us, the man said. An inauthentic story is about you. Lopez goes on to say, be it fiction or nonfiction, a story, an authentic story, should do two things. First of all, it's got to help. The story has to help. And the second thing is, it's got to be about us.
Thank you, Marilee, and thank you, Larry, for sharing a little bit more about your love story, but also about how you had this, you were able to communicate with and appease the gods. Anthropologist Margaret Mead was asked by a student what she considered to be the first sign of civilization. Mead said that the first sign is a culture, an ancient culture with a healed femur bone. If you broke your femur bone, there was no way that you would be able to eat and stay safe and survive without someone else helping you for a long period of time, doing the very basic things needed for life. Mead is said to have concluded helping someone through a difficult time is where civilization starts. Now, despite several diligent attempts, nobody has been able to cite this source. When did she say this? What was the context? Where did it happen? And despite the widespread debunking of this quote as being a true story, it is still going viral on the internet. It is still being shared. In fact, I think I shared it once while I was teaching. I had not realized that the background behind it. But I think it tells us something about stories, about authentic stories, stories that are about us. That great cities, societal structures with systems of justice, amazing works of art and architecture, this is a story about us. And perhaps we want this story, this version of it, to be true, that it all begins by helping another person through difficult times, that it's all built from there. Now, it's interesting how this mirrors one of the universals across religious and cultural stories, sometimes called the Golden Rule, being a good neighbor, caring for one another. Ministers and all kinds of religious leaders traffic in stories, parables, teachings, poems, to help communities live into the Golden Rule. In the Story for All Ages, we explored how, when we were young, we were told stories and how these stories continue to shape us today. I could not, and likely should not, be a minister without a reverence and respect for story. Now, stories that explain the way things are, natural phenomenon, why does the sun rise, why are we here on earth, where did the universe come from, that also link with the morality. What does it mean to be me? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to have humanity? How do I do that? The stories that link those two together are called myth. Every single religious and cultural story at its very root is myth. And to say myth, sometimes people think, oh, a little story. But it is the most powerful thing. And when they are unexamined, when we don't know they're there, we might be living a story that we don't even know could be rewritten. When colonization expanded and vastly different cultures collided, they needed a way to describe the stories that I'm talking about, these myths. And what they used was this word from the Latin, reconnect, religion. That is a word that came about when cultures collided. And it was a way of describing the sacred myths of another culture. Oral tradition was a major carrier of these stories throughout time. And what's interesting is if you learn about oral tradition, many of it wasn't just storytelling. I'm just going to say this story, but they were actually sang. They were sung. For example, the Psalms, poems in the Hebrew Bible, those were sung often as a community. And the way I was taught is the teacher or the leader would sing the song, and then the community would make meaning together out of what they were engaged with in their lives at that time. So storytelling wasn't just about telling the same story again and again, but it was encountering it with the concerns and cares of the day. So Unitarian Universalism likely has a core myth, a story. I think different people would tell it different ways. One way that I would tell it is that there is a source of life, there is a spirit of love, and we name these differently. But when we tell that and when we act upon that, we become community. We all belong, and we are all interdependent within that community. And this calls us to be more liberating, to have more liberating action for belonging and interdependence, to dwell in grace. That might be one way that I would tell the myth of Unitarian Universalism. Where do we find this story? How do we tell it? The UU Hymnary, so the songbooks of Unitarian Universalism, is a really interesting place to find the stories that have come throughout time. One thing that's really interesting about UU, the history of UU hymns, is that as a denomination, there were more Unitarian hymn books written than any other denomination. So there was a very prolific amount of singing and a very unique kinds of singing and song choices. A lot of original compositions were made. And not only that, but the traditional songs that were included, Unitarians and Universalists often changed the words, much to the dismay of some of the other groups and artists, of course, but those words were changed in order to be more liberating, more encompassing, more loving. They sang these songs. You can see throughout time that singing was such a big part of the tradition that they sang through slavery. They sang through the mass hysteria of communism. They sang through corruption. They sang through prohibition. They retold, reconnected with the story of belonging and being. That story that perhaps is the same or similar to what Margaret Mead is said to have shared, that civilization is built up from helping one another, especially those who are vulnerable, making a whole from that which has been broken. When it comes to myth, one of the theories that's happening right now in America is that there is actually something called a civil religion. This is one theory that's out there. Okay, so if you think about the fact that many countries are religious based, right? So they use that narrative, that integrated narrative of where we came from, why we're here, and what we should do as the way that they govern their country. In America, we have freedom of religion, and some people point to this idea that there's a civil religion, that we have sacred documents, the Constitution, that we have creedal language, the Declaration of Independence, that we have saints, Mount Rushmore. We have holy days, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, Memorial Day. And that what's interesting is that often, even maybe without realizing it, that dominant religious stories kind of intertwine with this civil religion. philosopher of religion Loyal Rue goes as far to say as not only is there perhaps the civil religion is here and it kind of gets intertwined and so it all becomes one story, but he says there's an insidious myth that has come into our midst that people are not even aware of. And it's overtaking all of the other religious myths that are out there. He calls it the myth of the marketplace. Now, I'm not someone who's like, it's all because of capitalism. Consumerism is terrible, right? Like, we know these systems that we're in, they're complicated, there's good things. If it was all bad, it would be easy, right? But the myth of the marketplace is simply that the free market is self-regulating, and if we keep it full of activity, it will provide for everyone's needs. That happiness comes from the accumulation of things, that safety and security can be bought. And so this myth of the marketplace, again, this is a theory, that it's taking over and people aren't examining, that they are living into this story. We have rituals around this. Black Friday. If you think about holidays have kind of been corrupted, he says, by this myth. So throughout the month of December, there were several holy days, and many of them have adopted this practice of wrapping paper. Enough wrapping paper, most of which is unrecyclable, not recyclable, was used in the month of December that could go from the earth to the moon. This idea that happiness comes from acquisition, that all people will be cared for as long as we keep putting enough energy and economic, no matter what the cost, right? And ideally within this, the cost of things, the extraction of resources, the extraction of goods and services are hidden. Because if we could actually see the deforestation, if we could see I have an iPhone, I have an iPad, I have a laptop. If I could see the children that are working in those factories and know that impact, would I consume those things? So part of this whole system is removing the consumer from the production, from as far away, as hidden as possible. And it's interesting that we have, a system that ties healthcare to employment. And that's just like how life is, right? I guess I'm saying this is a theory, but I see a lot of evidence that it's true. And if this theory is true, wouldn't it make sense that the king of the marketplace would also be those who have leadership? And I'm thinking, I worked in colleges before this job, and it was like this big trend to hire, CEOs of large businesses to run colleges. That was like, we need to run them like a business. I can tell you from firsthand experience, it was, I don't know. I think people with education experience did a little better job. That's my personal experience. But wouldn't it make sense that we would elect Donald Trump, the king of the marketplace, that Elon Musk would be part of that leadership team, that those who control the narrative and the media, Zuckerberg, those who help to keep that marketplace going with limitless supply, Bezos, that those are some of the key characters who are leading the marketplace as so entwined with our story as to become like a religion. I find ample evidence that this is the world we live in. And what's interesting is if we consider this, I think it really gives everyone a chance to consider this trouble in the water, right? There's been a lot of people who have said, what has happened? What is this fissure in the world? My neighbor and I can't talk to each other. I don't understand my family members. There's alienation happening. Well, we know that when religions collide, right? When the stories we tell are so different from another person, we can think perhaps of those who are living in the myth of the marketplace as those like encountering someone, if that is not the myth that you live by. If perhaps your myth is more like what Margaret Mead is said to have shared, that civilization starts by helping one another, that we are all better when we serve one another. I serve you in order to be served. All flourishing is mutual, as the botanist Robin Wall Kimmerer puts it. When you have those two vastly different integrated narratives in your lives, we have seen what happens in religion when that occurs. There's exclusive, so we reject or defend. We dig in to our stories, and we have fissure. Inclusive, so when religions kind of meet and there's inclusion, that is where we see interfaith collaboration. We have tea together. Alliances are made. We are talking. There's dialogue with one another. And then the more extreme, on the other side is pluralism, where we live together and can affirm that more than one source of authority is true. And I think about this in the context of authentic and inauthentic stories. So if I were to take the myth of the marketplace and say, that is true, right? If you keep the marketplace going, you keep it going, it keeps providing. And unfortunately, this theory that it provides for everyone is lovely, but in real life, what most of us see is, it doesn't lift all the boats, it only lifts the yachts. So it would be great if it was working in this way, but our real lived experiences and any kind of spiritual or religious teaching, I believe we have to put in dialogue with our lived experiences. So to me, it seems that the myth of the marketplace is true, but it's an unauthentic story. It's about me, not us. Authentic stories that affirm the worth and dignity of every human being, that show that we can integrate the lessons and the learnings from our problems, and we aren't our problems, that allow us to create caring community that has that interdependent web as its source. When we live into these stories, I believe those are authentic stories. And so while they are both true, pluralism, right? Multiple sources can be true. I think Barry Lopez gives us a gift in sharing what he learned about inauthentic and authentic stories, and which one are we living today? It's interesting to think about the Reverend who called for mercy, right? Shared a story. That's part of her integrated narrative, that we show mercy for those who are vulnerable, that has become this great clanging bell with, again, what I consider to be evidence that the myth of the marketplace, our leader, President Donald Trump, that is a myth that is so foreign to the story, the integrated narrative that he is living, that calling for her to resign, calling for her to be deported. One of our congressional leaders just did that. Again, that's exclusive, right? So I want to conclude with a story. I know we're going a little long here. My story is this. It's a personal story. Last summer, I froze in despair. I began to relive 2016 when I was not a minister. I had no dream of becoming a minister. I was in a very different work at that time. I was doing some international citizen-to-citizen diplomacy. And because of that, I was exposed. I was in a situation that I had a front row seat to the justice system unraveling for vulnerable people, for a lack of accountability, and for basically whole systems collapsing around what had been there to take care of we. I knew too much. I know too much. And so despair froze me. Like the movie Inside Out, I began to understand that despair was only a part of me. It wasn't all of me. And as soon as I accepted and just said, okay, despair, I hear you. It's okay. You're part of me. Despair didn't have to get so big and take over everything. Despair said, tomorrow will not be better than today, and it might even be worse. Okay, thank you. You're my teacher. But despair, I want to tell you a story. Is that okay? Many years ago, there was these loving, caring people who were really struggling with the world around them. There was dehumanizing injustice, there was corruption, and these people felt hopeless to change it. Do you know what they did? They sang. They sang stories of love and peace and justice. They sang of faith, which is hope without certainty. These were our UU ancestors who kept telling stories of a different world than what they were experiencing. And like the tide, civil rights rolled in, rights of nature rolled in, and they were ready to live into the stories because they had been telling them all along. But the tide is going out now, and despair, we can still sing. Because I remember a time in my life when I was younger, it was defined by fear, and I lost my voice. I could not speak about what was happening. This is when I stopped singing. There's many ways I can tell this story, and they are all true, but here is how I will tell it. When I quit singing was when I stopped believing there was hope. It was when I stopped asking my ancestors for guidance. It was when I stopped living the story that I wanted to pass on to future generations. So despair, can we try something different this time? Can we stay open-hearted and not frozen in fear? I want to know the stories that say civilization begins with helping one another. So despair, will you sing with me? I know it sounds like a small thing, but it is the language of connection to the all. In singing, we become like spirit, a powerful but invisible energy that can change the course of lives and the world. Vibration, beats, and air become one harmony. Music is the medium of awe and wonder and beauty which we can experience and participate in. I believe it is what Pete Seeger captured when he said, songs are funny things. They can slip across borders, proliferate in prisons, penetrate hard shells. I always believed that the right song in the right moment could change history. There was a song that began as a Baptist hymn, was adopted by the Quakers, and then Pete Seeger in the 1960s changed some of the words. Oh, goodness. My life flows on in endless song, above earth's lamentations. It finds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? The tradition of this song shows the story that we can have a song that's full of joy and full of hope and sing it throughout the most difficult times in our lives. That its heritage is that it can go beyond and across different cultures and people and continue to move us. Despair, I'm sorry, but it's not all about you. I am part of this bigger story. And when we ground in the authentic story and sing it, we move towards thriving with joy. Because joy, she's here too. My dear friends, in the weeks and months to come, don't let anyone or anything keep you from singing. Don't let anyone or anything write your story where joy isn't there too. And with that, I'll say amen, which simply means let it be so. Thank you for allowing me to share and share and share today.